Welcome to the Cannabis Pioneer Show. Today I have an important interview for investors in this sector, as well as individuals who are interested in the process of ending the cannabis prohibition in America and how businesses operate at the moment when many states have legalized pot for medicinal, recreational, or both, but the federal government is still behind. Our guest is cannabis expert lawyer Robert Hoban, who heads a large cannabis law firm with offices across many states and headquartered in Denver, Colorado. Bob is one of the best sources of information about what's currently happening in the field because of his unique role as a lawyer. He gets to meet with investors, politicians, regulators, entrepreneurs, bankers, you name it. This will be a very valuable interview, and he's here to share his real-life experience with us. Bob, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing this morning?
First of all, as a lawyer, what do you think of this whole scenario where states have legalized and the federal government hasn't? Is this, from a legal perspective, wise?
Well, see, this is somewhat unique to the United States. Our practice as my law firm and as a lawyer, we work all around the world, and we figure out that most of the governments around the world, they lead. The national government leads and can be very crystal clear about what their objectives are. Germany, Uruguay, so forth and so on. Israel, for example. In the United States, from a public policy and politics perspective, because we're so divided, everything is so one way or the other, that we're far more comfortable doing things in a way that that sort of creeps towards the policy goal. And in the United States, unfortunately, our political leaders are not really leaders so much as paternalistic policymakers. So when you need policy change to occur, it really has to happen from the grassroots, from the people. And that's how we saw this movement happening across the United States. It was ballot measures, it was initiatives, it was citizens organizing, putting something on a ballot and stepping up and saying, we want this change. And frankly, to the surprise of our politicians who still resist the fact that marijuana is legal. So I think it's more typical of United States politics than it is about whether it's wise public policy or not, because we see the same result achieved in other countries through strong national leadership.
I see that states are really limiting the amount of licenses they issue and the permits, etc. Why is this their policy? Is this an experimental stage, basically? Don't they want to see more jobs, more tax revenue, and more free market competition? Or is this more of a test trial, probational period?
Sure, but again, this is really a test, right? This is an experiment to see if this will actually work, to see if governments can actually get their arms around this and regulate this industry. So while certainly governments want the tax revenue, they all have to see in their own distinct way that regulation is working. So the notion that you would put a limit on the number of businesses, that simply helps the government get their arms around the industry operators, the actors, and to make sure that the people that are operating in the space are actually complying with the law. We'll see over the course of a few years when states get comfortable that they recognize that regulation actually works. We'll see them lift those caps, and then those caps, limitations on the number of licenses, that will really be a local government decision across the board. So it's not that they don't want the money or the revenue. I think it's kind of this wait and see approach because states unfortunately refuse to learn from each other. They want to experiment and find out how things work on their own, and that, of course, doesn't make progress move very quickly.
What are the next milestones to achieve? Which states are next? Is institutional money beginning to gain confidence? Are banks opening their eyes to this? Or are they just satisfied with laundering, erring money as they've done for centuries?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, we certainly see a lot of institutional capital. I mean, our law firm alone is associated with over $250 million of private equity funding, not to mention the companies that we've taken public for our clients and the capital that was raised from those public markets. So institutional money is slowly but surely creeping in, but creeping in more of a private equity and a public markets way. Banks are still somewhat hesitant both in the United States and around the world. I don't know if you've seen what's happening in Uruguay. We're working closely with the Uruguay government to help them get through their banking issues. And then we saw recently that the publicly traded markets out of Canada are being influenced the same way by the U.S. federal government in terms of banking, indicating that Canadian holdings through those public markets can't be majority comprised of U.S.-based holdings. So the United States federal government is certainly not making this easier for bankers or institutional money to come in. The problems that result from that mean that you have to go through alternative funding mechanisms. We're not going to see Wells Fargo, for example, making loans to the cannabis industry unless and until there's absolute certainty at the federal level that everything that's happening is 100% legal. Again, Canada's a great example for this. Canada doesn't even have a robust commercial program yet on the adult use or the recreational side of the market, yet everybody rushes to Canada to participate in their publicly traded markets, simply because you had a national government which supported the industry. So at the end of the day, it's slowly but surely happening. The dollars are there, but not under the names of those traditional institutional investors. It's more of private equity folks, family offices, groups of individuals that are very wealthy, oftentimes associated with large institutional funds that choose to invest on their own unless and until there's absolute federal clarity on the issue.
Have you spoken to farmers or U.S. agricultural workers excited about industrial hemp?
Absolutely. So, when you think about farmers, certainly, cannabis is a crop, whether it's marijuana or hemp, that can be grown, and certainly it's a more profitable crop, whether it is hemp or marijuana, than many other agricultural crops out there. But at the end of the day, we'll see farmers replacing their crops with industrial hemp. We'll see farmers expanding their operations with industrial hemp. We'll see farmers using industrial hemp as a rotational crop. We've seen the numbers almost double for the first 3 years of domestic cultivation here in the United States under the Farm Bill. It didn't increase as substantially this year, but that was really a lack of certified seeds that caused that scenario, not a lack of desire by farmers. The marijuana side's still a little slow because farmers in the United States have traditionally been used to the idea of federal government subsidies, and they build their business plans around that. And anybody farming marijuana versus the cousin industrial hemp, there's still a lot of black market or legality issues surrounding that. And so you're not seeing traditional farmers jump into the marijuana side, but absolutely on the industrial hemp side.
Should the states use some of the tax revenue in order to fund some programs to educate youth about cannabis and proper and dosage uses?
Absolutely. And in fact, we saw Colorado as the first state to really tax and regulate adult use marijuana. A substantial portion of its revenue goes towards an educational campaign. And that educational campaign started out, by the way, in a very negative way. The notion was, or the tagline was, don't be a lab rat. In other words, it was more of this prohibition, don't just say no type mentality. Don't try this stuff. Whereas that messaging has changed to be more educational and frankly more effective by saying, look, if you're going to do this, start slow and take a small amount of these products, because this is critically important, particularly for tourists. One of the things we've seen in Colorado and what they see in many of these adult use markets is the number of tourists that come for marijuana-related tourism. They don't know that you're not supposed to walk into a store, buy an entire cannabis candy bar, and eat the whole candy bar. So there's an educational component that simply helps the public health, helps consumers, and educates youth about what this plant really is, what it does, and that it's not certainly heroin or cocaine by any stretch of the imagination, but it's also not a bowl of cereal on the other hand. So I think educational campaigns are moving forward, and certainly the dollars that come from then the tax revenue generated off of this plant, they're used for schools, school districts, capital improvements. They're used for addressing homelessness issues in the state of Colorado and outside of Colorado. Those dollars are also used for research and development. So there's a lot of positive things that come out of this tax revenue. And once governments get past the notion that this is so-called blood money, that it actually can have a positive impact on society, and at the same time not negatively impact society through the use of cannabis, we'll see more and more of it.
How would you describe the people getting involved in the legal cannabis industry in terms of their core values in life and what is important to them?
Well, that's a pretty broad question. I think that first of all, as a law firm that practices, 60% of our business is marijuana industry related, 40% of our business is industrial hemp related. There are very, very, very different individual actors in the marijuana versus the hemp industry, although we're seeing a lot of marijuana industry operators also open up industrial hemp operations on the other side. But there's very, very different, characteristics or demographics for this. At the beginning of the industry, and when I say at the beginning, most states unfold exactly the same way for the first 2 to 3 years. So at the beginning of the industry, it's a lot of younger males, younger white males, frankly, 25 to 35 years old. They tend to come from a situation where they have access to or personally have wealth to invest in the industry. And then as that business expands and they need to take on additional investment, their businesses become more professionalized. The investment dictates that there's a good corporate organization, a good structure, and that successful business people are involved. On the industrial hemp side, it's far more folks that are traditional agricultural farmers and operators, traditional agricultural processing outfits, and traditional industrial and agricultural participants and institutional folks that come in and say, we've done this with other industries, let's do it with industrial hemp as well. So there's a very, very different demographic on both the marijuana and the industrial hemp side. Although the marijuana side, we see that evolve almost daily and becoming far more professionalized. But at the very beginning, it's a lot of risk takers, a lot of young white males, and a lot of folks that came from the gray or the black market that want to reinvent themselves and bring this above board.
How much room for growth does this industry have, in your opinion?
Well, I think the sky's the limit for the cannabis industry overall. I mean, if you subdivide that between marijuana and hemp, it probably makes the most sense to address it that way. So if you look at the marijuana industry, we've seen enormous growth just in the last 3 to 5 years, to the point where it's predicted, with California and Nevada fully participating in an adult use marketplace, it's predicted that the industry will all of a sudden be a $20 billion US industry. That being followed by the fact that dozens of governments, international, national governments around the world, are following suit and introducing commercial marijuana programs, whether they're recreational adult use programs or whether they're medical programs. We're going to see those numbers increase, and then we're seeing that plug into a global cannabis economy. I mean, our firm is involved in transactions where we're legally moving thousands of kilos of marijuana around the world legally each month between international governments. So I think because of the trend of states and tax revenue and this trend of international governments, the marijuana side is going to grow substantially. And I know there's certainly an end in sight. Nothing grows forever, but I don't know where that number ends. I have a huge upside on the industrial hemp side, because what's unique about industrial hemp is that the industrial hemp industry has existed around the world for the last 90 plus years without the United States. And now the United States is simply plugging it into it, advancing it, bringing dollars and entrepreneurial mentality and technology innovation to the industrial hemp scene. We're going to see industrial hemp really become the larger side of the cannabis industry. It will be so much larger than marijuana because you can plug industrial hemp into a variety of already existing products and distribution channels. And when we get things dialed in regarding biomass supply for hemp-based plastics, hemp-based fuels, hemp-based supercapacitors, hemp-based building materials, let alone hemp-based food and wellness products, you're going to see this dwarf the marijuana industry in the next 5 to 8 years by a long shot.
What do you believe would be the social benefits of legalizing marijuana federally?
It's a great question. I think we've seen social benefits already from a social justice perspective at the state levels because of states legalizing it, where all of a sudden disadvantaged youths, folks that grow up in less advantageous situations who might otherwise be arrested or found in possession of cannabis when it's legal, they no longer have this stigma, which prevents them from going to college and getting college loans and puts a black mark on their record for going forward and really, stops their contribution to society from the very beginning. So the decriminalization element of legalization has already shown great promise because we're not putting a black mark on disadvantaged youth's lives from the very beginning. Another couple of things that we see because of legalization is the fact that people are beginning to understand that we need to cut the law enforcement, the institutional law enforcement industry, the criminal justice industry off of the dollars that it gets from arresting small-time cannabis offenders. That's not a productive use of our government and law enforcement's time. It's not a productive use of our dollars from a tax perspective. Now, if the federal government were to follow suit and ultimately legalize the plant in some form or fashion, that's a little bit more clarified than it is today. I think that we'll see those benefits, certainly go across the entire United States, and we'll see the social benefits of having cannabis available as an alternative medicine, which will undoubtedly and has undoubtedly addressed the opioid crisis in America in a positive way. For example, everyone always identified marijuana as the gateway drug. But what we've found out is it's really the getaway drug. It really helps people get away from addictive substances such as the opiates that have such an epidemic in the United States. Unfortunately, I'm not so sure our current presidential administration understands and appreciates the science behind that. But that's certainly the thinking behind a number of international governments, such as Uruguay and beyond, for their legalization, that this will help society because it is something that's not addictive, that is not something that's going to ruin people's lives, and something that's not going to benefit only a small few pharmaceutical companies, but rather benefits the government and the school systems and society as a whole through the tax revenue generated therefrom.
What are the most common obstacles you run to as a lawyer that entrepreneurs come to you with and face?
That's a great question. The number one obstacle is sophistication. Folks that come to the cannabis industry want to participate, but this is not the stereotypical marijuana industry that you might see on television. You have to be sophisticated. You have to be organized. You have to have top quality business professionals involved in your operation, whether that's a infused products manufacturer, whether it's a dispensary, whether it's a cultivation facility. It can't be business as usual as if this were the black market. To be successful, to compete, to comply with regulations, you need to understand the types of people you need involved in your organization to make things work and to make things go smoothly and to provide a return for your investors, frankly. That's the most critical component that's lacking. But the second most critical component, which is a close second, is the inability to obtain the type of capital that these folks need to move forward. Capital is out there, and it's out there in tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of availability. However, you really have to be sophisticated from an organizational perspective to make yourself eligible for the capital. So it's a problem that sort of creates itself for the lack of sophistication at the outset. This is all changing very rapidly as we see very successful entrepreneurs and institutional individuals come out of the mainstream industries and into the cannabis industry. So then all of a sudden, sophistication and capital is starting to become the norm, but it's not there yet. And because of those things, there's a lot of people that will fail in their business efforts in this industry.
Bob, how can potential clients get in touch with you?
Our website is a great place to stay in tune for what's happening. That's www.hoban.law, Hoban.law. Our Facebook and our LinkedIn page provides regular updates multiple times per day of industry news, industry-related business news, and other related topics, including where I or my team of attorneys around the country will be participating in conferences and seminars and educational events. So that's one way to look at it. Of course, if anyone is looking for counsel in this space, they're encouraged to call our main office, our headquarters based out of Denver, Colorado at 303-674-7000. And in doing so, you will be connected with an attorney in your jurisdiction who can address your specific legal need as it relates to this industry.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom and boots on the ground knowledge with us today, Mr. Hoban. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
Cannabis has been with us since 3000 BC. As recently as the 19th century, a large part of the population was consuming for medicinal or recreational purposes. The 1925 International Opium Convention put the drug firmly on the wrong side of the law in a wide range of countries around the globe. In the US, the first drug czar, Harry Anslinger, came out with the Uniform State Narcotic Drug Act of 1934 to criminalize marijuana. As of January 2017 and November 2017, a long list of nations including Australia, the Netherlands, Canada, Chile, Czech Republic, India, and Spain have decriminalized the use of the drug, while many more have authorized it for medicinal purposes. And in the US, while it's still illegal under federal law, 8 states have voted to legalize recreational consumption, with California being next. Medicinal use is permitted in 29 states, as well as the U.S. territories of Guam, Puerto Rico, and its capital, Washington, D.C. This is a sector many are predicting will generate over 250,000 jobs by 2020, with legal marijuana sales projected to reach $24 billion by 2025. Go to wealthresearchgroup.com/cannabis to learn more, and thank you for joining us.